And welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm H. Wayne Wilson, and I have a statistic that might surprise some of you. 1/5 of those who start high school do not finish high school in 4 years in America. Those are statistics from 2011, 20%, and that is an improved number. It used to be worse than that. We're going to talk about dropout rates, truancy, and programs to correct those deficiencies with two experts in the area. We have Glenn Hoffman here. Glenn is the director of the alternative school for the DeWitt Livingston McLean County Regional Office of Education.
Correct.
We may refer to that as ROE. If you hear that term, that's Regional Office of Education. And also with a ROE is Oliver Mack. He is the director of truancy programs for the Peoria ROE. Oliver, thank you for being with us. When we mention that number, 1/5 of people who enter high school, that stuns me. 1/5, 20% aren't going to finish in 4 years. Now, that doesn't mean they don't eventually get a GED or some alternative form of education, but we can't tolerate that anymore. Maybe 50 years ago, we could tolerate that, but the economy has changed.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're looking at, even if back in the day, if you could have gone to work on the farm, I know too many farmers, and even the high tech that's going on inside of their tractors and how everything is computer based and so on, there's no longer that job waiting out there for somebody who just has a good, hard work ethic. They need the skills that come along with a public education.
Let me share some numbers with you in terms of the number of, these are the total number of dropouts, truants, and chronic truants in the respective counties. By the way, Lorenzo Pugh of the Knox County ROE was scheduled to be here because of the snowstorm on the day that we taped this program. He was unable to make it. But in Knox County, 214 dropouts, truants, and chronic truants. In Peoria County, 375. And in the three-county area, DeWitt, Livingston, McLean, 490. So you have quite a few kids that you have to deal with. When do you start?
We start every school year, right? When school starts, we start late August. We start to prep. We start to make contacts through the school system. And it takes a little while, so we'll maybe slightly idle at the beginning of the year, but probably by October, November, for sure, we're in full swing. And part of what we do is we are no longer called officers. We're called social workers, child advocates, if you will, because we do so much more than just try to enforce the laws of education. And part of that is meeting with the family in their own environment. To me, that's the biggest bang for your buck. When you sit down at the dinner table, when you talk to them, you have a conversation about education, to me, that carries a lot of weight.
Is it too soon to start in grade school?
Absolutely. It's not too soon. In fact, I think that's where it needs to begin. And we need to, some of these young mothers, single parents, we need to identify them early in kindergarten, first grade, and start the process of building these families up. Truancy is a symptom. It's not the core issue of what's happening. And so until we get in there and find out exactly what plagues this family, we can't do anything about it. And there are many risk factors that these families have at the beginning that hurt them.
Before we go any further, we ought to define truancy. There's a state definition for truant.
There is a state definition, and in fact, that's just changed. The state definition is now currently 9 days.
9 days, yes.
And 9 days, and that makes you truant.
Unexcused.
Unexcused days makes you chronic truant.
And unexcused is defined by every school board's policy. So what is an unexcused absence? And what isn't. And that's why sometimes when you see the different stats that are out there, they can change from school to school, from district to district, from building to building, based upon what is that definition of an unexcused absence.
And the old definition of truancy was 18 days.
That's right.
Now that it's 9, it gives you an opportunity to intervene sooner?
It does, and I think it's important, like we had talked about earlier, that if you wait until 18 days unexcused, and then you may have another 10 or 15 days excused, 30, 35 days, that's a lot of time missed in a school year before we start to come in and work with the family. So 9 days give us an opportunity to go in there real quick to try to assess the situation, to try to make some sort of fundamental change with the particular family, and I think that's better in the long run.
We're going to talk about alternative schools and safe schools in just a moment, but I want to stay on the truancy question. And what do you find yourself facing when you I assume you talk to parents,
Absolutely.
to children, you go to the homes. What
Okay.
kinds of problems do you face?
Well, the problems are many. I mean, most of the families are low income, which that by itself doesn't mean a whole bunch, but low income does play a factor, Single parent plays a factor. What we are finding now more is even with well-to-do families, a divorce that hurts the family, where loss of resources and also emotional trauma for the kid and for the mom, and so that can hinder the issue with that. So, there are a host of issues that plague a family, and some we can affect by what we do, and some that we cannot. But what we have to do is have the conversation about education and what works and what we have to do going forward.
Do you have some tools in your pocket that you can use to try to change the pattern? Because they can develop a habit of, I'm just not going to go today.
Yeah. Fundamental tool is the home visit. The home visit is probably the single best thing that we do, sitting down at the kitchen table with the parents. So the conversation begins right there. If we have resistance, then there's some other things that we could do. We mentioned the state's attorney's office. We can do that. Some counties offer tickets to families. I don't buy into that fact. I don't like to throw that sort of thing on top of weak families. But the court system is no question when a family is young. I like to use that as a caveat to sway someone's mind.
Do we face a situation, Glenn, where sometimes the truancy comes after some other issues, and Oliver mentioned some home issues, but it might be that they fall behind in their schooling?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've got the first part, if we go into dropouts, is we know that dropouts, the number one cause of dropouts is a student gets behind in credits. So we know that goes beyond income or anything like that, even though those are definitely factors in there. But once they start getting behind, their ability to become one of those dropouts is the highest it can be.
So I assume that when you meet with these people, whether they've dropped out or they're truant, that they always have an excuse.
What's interesting there is we looked at our forms even because of the fact that I don't know that it's always an excuse. I think sometimes it's us. And we have to look at what we do also. We used to have a form that would come on out that would tell you instantly how you're doing everything wrong. That was the letter that you were sent if your child was truant. And at the bottom of the letter, it said, and if you need any help, we'll be calling you. And that simple flip-flop, I think that was a remnant left over from the old truancy officer, where you were coming to get them and so on. But looking at it and going, we start off all phone calls. I love listening to my truancy officers on the phone because they start off by going, what can I do to help you? And I think it really changes the fundamental relationship from the beginning. And so our forms now talk about first that we'll be contacting them, we'll be looking for things that we can do with them, and then somewhere on the bottom it'll mention, by the way, and if you're not participating in the system, there are consequences that can happen. But I think part of what we have to watch for is our involvement also on this new form of truancy and how we're being more effective because we're looking at it differently.
How effective are we in getting kids back into regular attendance?
Well, our program focuses on K through 8. We are extremely successful. We go in early, like I said before, and typically when a kid enrolls into our program as a chronic truant, on the flip side, at the end of the process, we have improved the attendance substantially. Last year, we reported to the state that our program, 375 kids, 62% of them raised the attendance rate up to 90%, and maybe another 10% got it over 85%. So we do make a significant difference. And again, it starts with conversations and not being punitive, but also trying to be supportive with these families.
Now, as Oliver mentioned, he works with K through 8. You're primarily high school.
No. Yes.
No, yes. Do you want to explain that for me?
I do, and that's funny. It's a standard answer. But our truancy does start all the way from K through 12. So we understand the fact that if we're going to make a difference in the lives of a truant, we do need to get in there early, and that we're going to be more effective if we get in there earlier. Now, when you get into the alternative schools and you get into the area of the safe schools and all those other things with dropouts, then that does become more of a junior high through high school, so 7 through 12.
Is there a difference dealing with high school students and families than there is dealing with a fifth grader, say?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the biggest one is just getting people to identify what is truancy. For example, if you had 20 unexcused absences this year so far, or excused absences, I'm sorry, 20 excused absences. I've called them in every time. You know, we had to go do this, we had to go take care of this. As a young student, you may not think about the negative impact of that, but there is a tremendous impact. Absences are absences, and 20 of them starts a pattern that by high school, it can be very ingrained into who they are, that they're used to not being here. You know, we talk about different issues that go on in families' lives. Some of them are mom's working 2 minimum wage jobs, so she's working 16 hours a day. They also have younger brothers and younger sisters. Who's watching the children? You know, I can't tell you how many times where the truant is there, because if you listen to his reason, it's pretty solid. Someone has to watch the child. And so I'm staying on home in order to make sure, because my mom has to work a double shift. Okay. And that's a different look.
But that still doesn't help the situation where they need an education if they're going to be successful later, or we're going to repeat the problem that mom is having.
Without a doubt. And I think there's a fundamental difference with young kids and older kids, where the young kids have not made up their mind. Some of these older kids have made up their mind. So it may be they're going to drop out, or maybe go to alternative education or safe schools. But the young kid, you have an ability to affect exactly what's going to happen if the timing is right. And sometimes he mentioned that parents have opened their doors to us and welcomed us in. But there's still a resistant part to some folks that don't like seeing us show up at the door.
Let me share some other simple statistics. This is from the Bureau of Labor statistics. Dropouts are almost twice as likely to be unemployed as recent high school graduates. From the U.S. Census Bureau, dropouts are more than twice as likely to receive some sort of welfare benefit. And almost 70% of state prison inmates are high school dropouts. That sounds like you have a daunting task in front of you.
Actually, I think in many ways we have a great opportunity, because by getting involved with the students, you can hear just from the stats that you read that if we are effective and the work that we do, I always say we're one of the greatest values out there. We know how much it costs to put an inmate into the prison system. We're substantially less than it is to house somebody for the rest of their lives, or even for a period of time in the prison system. And we have the opportunity to get into families, to help them out, to look at decisions that they're making, and sometimes just giving them better education. You know, the mom who's treating their children at home with Vaseline to kill off the lice, and that's why they're not going to school, to find out that Vaseline doesn't really snuff out lice, you know, to the ability of giving that type of training to a new mom who's dealing with her children now is really a great opportunity, and a great thing when you get to see a student who comes back who is being successful, and you realize that you had a hand in that.
Glenn mentioned the funding to help, you know, teach these families, and you're primarily funded through what are called TAOP grants?
That's right.
Could you explain that? You don't have to explain what TAOP stands for, because no one's going to remember it, but that's a state fund?
It's a state fund. I think it's gotten cut every single year since I've been here, and I think it was at $16 million at its highest since I've been here, and maybe it's down to 12 now. And so that means if they cut $4 million, every TAOP program, truancy program, gets cut in this region.
About a quarter of TAOP grants in the last 6 years, is that what we're talking about?
Something like that.
About a quarter, $4 million out of $16 million has been cut. How you're facing budget cuts in DeWitt, Livingston, McLean?
Absolutely, absolutely. Every year we know that we are going to be told to write the grant right around now for level funding. And then we know that they will find out how much money the legislation has decided to allocate towards that. It has been, as Oliver said, the last so many years, a number that keeps going down smaller and smaller, and then we figure out what kind of services we're going to provide. It becomes an interesting challenge when you talk about when do you start with a family, when do you start with a student? Well, in many ways, it's most appropriate to be starting before the school year starts, to get that student ready, to pass out things such as school-ready backpacks with the right school materials, to be able to help students with, we pass out hygiene kits, which are those basic things that you need for school. Sometimes when a student doesn't show up to school, it's because of the fact that he's embarrassed. If you smell and your friends make fun of you for smelling, after a while you're going to stop showing on up, and as something as simple as a pack with the right amount of deodorant for a junior high kid whose body is changing and he knows it and is now acting differently, or the correct materials for school or something that they're proud of that we take for granted with so many of the students who are being successful in school.
Are there situations where, because of the funding or the reduced funding, you start with a certain number of kids, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then partway through the school year, you are serving fewer children?
Well, it doesn't quite work like that. Typically, when you write the grant, you have to state on the grant that you're going to serve X amount of kids. So every county does that, and we do the same thing. I think we state 400 kids a year, and we try to reach that goal. If we have to reduce our staff, then each staff member remaining have to pick up the residual kids.
Are there alternative ways to help make up the difference?
To make up the difference in the cash. We have had some wonderful partnerships out there that have popped on up. Our local churches, for example, helped out with the hygiene kits. All we do is we ask them, and we got a single person, a single point of contact with one of the churches who then puts out the alarm of this is what we're looking for. And that can be coats, because you don't want to have the school locker room that is chock full of every coat that you possibly need, because now we have to pay for storage. But the ability to call on up and say, hey, we've got some students who need these things. We also had a wonderful relationship for the last 3 years, going into our 4th year, but this will be the last of the 4 years, it looks like, so far for McLean County, with our United Way. And in our United Way, we looked at other ways of servicing potential dropouts by getting netbooks and computers in front of the students so that we can help them with that other stat we talked about, which is a student who's behind in credits is most apt to drop out. So how do we help them get caught up around all the barriers that are their lives? And the netbook model using Skype so that a teacher can get into their house at any point in time really works around some students' schedules, some people's life schedules, and their house schedules.
And you face similar situations where you have to look at alternative ways to crack the nut?
Yeah, we have not done a whole bunch, but one thing the county did 6 years ago is they hired me. Okay, this is money coming directly from the county as a caseworker, whereas before the District 150 grant was covering all of it. So I do strictly county schools, and that has helped. This year we set up a private fund where we're trying to ask for donations, and we got a little bit of money in this year, but we're just at the beginning stages of trying to find different funds.
And that private fund, does that come through the Peoria ROE?
It does. It does.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, do you have something similar to that?
For
a private fund?
Other than the ones that we've talked about, no. There's
but churches are private.
Okay, then yes. Okay. Because it's interesting, because I don't look at it necessarily as monies coming on in as much as it is the types of services that a student needs, and that was what was drawing me off.
I mentioned earlier safe and alternative schools, and we haven't talked about them yet. Define safe versus alternative school.
Sure. Alternative schools are older than safe schools. Safe schools started about 13 years ago, and it was a reaction to the mandatory expulsions, suspensions that were going on. You know, a student brings a gun to school, he's got to be gone. He has drugs on school, he's mandatorily needs to be suspended or expelled from school for a period of time. The challenge is you would have students who still needed that education, that 2 years of sitting at home because of the fact that they made a mistake was now giving them a greater odd of dropping out of school. So because of that, the Regional Safe School program started, and those were designed as an alternative to suspensions and expulsions. So the only way a student can get into that program is that he has had multiple suspensions or is actively expelled from school at the moment. Alternative ed has been around for a much longer time. In fact, our building has been around for 27 years. And in the last 27 years, we have been a program that can also be a student choice, where life has changed, but you still want your high school diploma. And that the public school building itself, for whatever reason, isn't the perfect fit that either the school has identified, but even more positively, I think it's when the students, the families identify of going, boy, this isn't necessarily fitting for me. I love the fact that our truancy outreach people are all part of our programming now. So they are well versed in all of our programming, and you see a great flow over where a truancy outreach person goes on home, talks to the family, the student's about to give up, and he goes, have you ever thought about looking into alt ed and finding out the details about that and finding out this unknown that they didn't know was available, and then watching what our graduation rates from those programs are through the roof. The amount of graduates that we have every year are just tremendous.
And you have 3 sites for alternative schools?
Correct. Correct. We have one in, our main campus is in McLean County, then we have one in DeWitt and one in Livingston.
And Peoria has a unique environment for its alternative school.
That's right. Wildlife Prairie Park started last year. Wonderful place for it. I talked to you earlier about the physical education is outdoor. They do trails and nature and all these different things. I think it's really great for the kids to have that sort of experience. They can see the buffalo walk up during lunchtime and they're feeding the buffaloes. To me, it's a great experience. And what I would like to say is sometimes we tend to try to box kids in, okay? Some people don't do well in traditional schools, and the kids that you see at alternative education are kids that have not done well for whatever reason in mainstream school, and now they've come to alternative school for a second chance.
So it's not a question of looking at them and saying, you're wrong.
Right.
They just needed a different environment.
Absolutely. And I think the uniqueness of alternative ed is the smallness of the school, the intimacy of the school is a really big point for that.
How big are classes typically?
Our upperclassmen never break 14. Most of our classes are at 12, and our junior high program tries not to break 10.
Really, that's small?
Absolutely.
And similar in most ROEs?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the biggest challenge that both of you face right now outside of cuts in state funding? What's the biggest challenge for you?
You know, I think right now one of the biggest challenges we're bumping into is about money, but it's one that most people wouldn't think of, and that is, for example, funding cuts to transportation. Transportation has been a wild card in there, where as schools are seeing less reimbursement for transportation, they're less apt to have the funds to be able to send a student to the types of programs that they know would work. If you would have asked us how many students we served 3 years ago, I would have said over 1,000. Right now, we're hovering right around 800. And when you look at that amount of drop, the biggest change that has happened during that time is the funding has been cut for transportation. And it's not one of those things that people think of when they think of the obvious ones, such as cut TEOP, you're going to have issues. But in this case here, how do you get the students to those types of services if no one's willing to pick up for the ride?
Biggest challenge on your side of the river?
It's money in the fact that if we have less workers, we have more kids that we have to serve. And so when you have a needy population with truancy, how do you get to spend substantial time to make the commitment for these folks to change their mind? And so when you have 150 kids or 100 kids in your case, that becomes more difficult. So I think that is the issue, the fact that can we provide quality services to all of the families that we're serving?
I know that you both deal with truants and with dropouts, but I want to mention one thing because the public probably is sitting there saying, well, there's a GED program. You both have GED programs. Yeah. In fact, there's a woman in Peoria who has dedicated herself to GED in trying to get these kids. But that's outside of the ROE? Or does the ROE have a GED program?
Well, it runs the program. They do the testing. We have a staff member that runs the program, I think, once a month, and so it's through our ROE.
And likewise for your 3 counties?
We do the testing also. Right now, Heartland Community College is actually the center hub for all GED services for the ROE 17 area.
I do want to mention one thing, is that sometimes we're going to hear the term Project Target. You might hear that in the future. That name's been around for a long time. It simply means...
That's the name of our program, our truancy prevention program. I don't know what the acronym meant. I haven't been in it long enough, but it's been around for almost 30 years. Like I said, the grant was written for District 150 almost 30 years ago, and that's the name that it's had. And I think the emphasis of it was we are targeting students to get them back in school.
So it may not stand for anything. but the point is that it's not so much the name, it's the dedication that you have to making sure the kids starting in kindergarten are properly motivated. Is that a fair way to describe this?
I'm going to say this. When we talk about these younger kids, it's not so much the kids, but the parent and what they're doing in that household. It's interesting that as you start to do visits and start to see what's happening, they're just small things that are happening during the course of the morning or maybe the night before that causes this sort of thing to happen.
So in essence, you're on occasion a social worker.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons why when you see a stat that says that dropout rates are down, and while the stat is still a horrible stat to read, it is something where it is improving. And I think we have gotten more informed as to what is the truant, and really the belief system that it is never, if you just treat the symptom, you're only going to be putting a patch on the pipe.
And with that, we're going to have to save the conversation for a later time because we're out of time. And I'd like to say thank you to Glenn Hoffman for the DeWitt Livingston McLean ROE and Oliver Mack for the Peoria ROE. Thank you both for enlightening us in the question of truancy and dropouts. We're going to take a couple of weeks off with alternative programming the next couple of weeks here on WTVP and be back in 3 weeks with a look at what community colleges are doing to help retrain adults. More education coming up on the next At Issue.